Today, in our virtual community, we have someone that I have the utmost admiration for. He is an icon of the civil rights movement. He led the Lynchburg, Virginia Improvement Association, a unit of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he did several years of work in the Boston area. He's an associate of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He worked very closely with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He worked on the National Executive Board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's an ordained and retired Baptist minister, a graduate of Harvard University, and an author, philanthropist, and a good friend of mine. Welcome to our virtual community, Dr. Virgil Wood. Welcome to our Black History Spotlight. How are you doing, Dr. Wood?
Dr. Belcher, I can't tell you how delighted and thrilled I am to be here with you today.
Thank you. Well, let's get started. I want to get started by asking you, how did you become an associate of Dr. King?
I first met Dr. King while I was still in college. That was 9 years before I joined him in his work. It was 1951. I was a junior at Virginia Union, my undergraduate school. And Martin had just finished his seminary work at Crozier, headed back to Atlanta, stopped off at Richmond for a visit. I guess there were 30 of us in the suite where we met with him. It's the first time I ever laid my eyes on him, didn't even know the name before that. Most of the fellows there were older veterans in seminary, and most of them knew the King family. Daddy King was very prominent in national affairs. But my work with Martin started in 1960. In 1958, I left my first pastor to go to Lynchburg to pastor the Diamond Hill Baptist Church, an old established Black church, great history in that city. I served that church for 6.5 years. Went there in 58, left in 63. I organized the Lynchburg Improvement Association as a unit of Southern Christian Leadership Conference. When Martin set the Poor People's Campaign, the March on Washington for 1963, I was the coordinator for the state of Virginia. That involved, mobilizing churches and civic groups and all kinds of groups to get buses and things to Washington for the march there. In 63, I left Lynchburg that fall to go back to Boston, where I labored with King's work for the next 10 years. Not only did I work with Martin Luther King, but I also worked with Leon Sullivan. You cannot know the Black church story in America without knowing about Martin Luther King, Samuel Proctor, Leon Sullivan. There's so many other names, but I want to make clear that the work that we did was part of the ministry of the Black church. And the civil rights movement has appended so many other things to the work of King that it's hard to tell where King left off and where this other stuff got started. And I can say more about that later.
Great. I overheard you talk about the March on Washington. What was your role in planning the March on Washington?
My role in planning was mobilizing the state of Virginia, churches all over the state, civic groups, Masonic groups, all of those, mobilize them and getting those buses up there. And as you recall, the March on Washington was really about economics. First thing out of Martin's mouth, people overstate the emphasis as, can't we all just get along? I have a dream. The first thing out of King's mouth was, we've come here to deal with a bad check. America has given the descendants of slaves a bad check, and it's come back marked insufficient funds. We're here to start collecting on that.
Awesome. I also just heard you talk about the March on Washington was about economics. I read somewhere where it is said that earlier on during the civil rights movement, you were were advocating for negotiation with Wall Street. How important was that to you then, and how important that is to you now?
And there's a leap here from 63 to 68, those 5 years. In 63, when I went back to Boston after coordinating the state of Virginia for the March on Washington and concluding my part in the Lynchburg movement, I served the ministry in the slums of Boston, the inner city. It was called Blue Hill Christian Center and Parish. We organized Martin's work there, brought him to Boston 2 years later. He marched 40,000 people on Boston Common. That was 1965. What I learned is that when you work with poor folks, you got to make sure that the good news of the gospel means exactly what it says. What is the best good news for poor people? The best good news for poor people is that they don't have to stay poor forever. In other words, the gospel is about spiritual emancipation and economic emancipation. Jesus taught that, and King was clear. The reporters were always trying to box him in your civil rights work. And he said, no, my work is ministry, and civil rights is one part of that. And you cannot create the movement that Martin created unless you got Jesus at the center of it. People got to understand the people we admire, Rosa Parks, Fred Douglass, go down the line, even Booker T. Washington, even Du Bois. Jesus was at the center of their thing. And it was because of, if you look at the 400-year sojourn of Black folks in America, 1619, come on up to 2019, and then go to 2069 for a minute. The first 50 years from 1865, all right, in emancipation. Let's start there, for example. Let's talk about each 50 years, each 50-year cycle they're on. From 1865 to 1915, Black folks came out of slavery with nothing but the rags on their back and whatever was in their hearts and in their minds and their skills. We were the best developed labor force in the whole world at that time. And now we have the opportunity to work for ourselves. And so the first 50 years out of slavery was that beloved community development where we created institutions. We created over 100 Black colleges and universities. We had help, but we did it. Over 100 Black colleges and universities. We created newspapers, communication centers. We created families. We created the churches. And we created banking, all of that. But the first 50 years out of slavery, that's beloved community. From 1865 to 1915, from 1955 down to 1965, those universities that have been created the first 50 years created a leadership for the period from 1915 to 1965. That's my year. That's my period. That's Martin's period. And so the leadership that was developed during that 50-year period gave us a turnaround in America. We created three major pieces of legislation or judicial changes in the life of America. So that by 1965, with the Voter Rights Act of Selma, with the Public Accommodations Bill out of Birmingham, and 63, 64, and then out of Montgomery, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and all of them had taken on Jim Crow, and they slew Jim Crow in Montgomery. Rosa Parks worked sitting on that bus, challenging Jim Crow with her very life. Rosa Parks. So we got the judicial change around Jim Crow in Montgomery. So when I said that by 1965, we had created those landmark changes in the character of America's democracy. Now, from 1965 to 2015, that was a period when we were negotiating what is our relationship with America. And sadly, we gave up the autonomy over our own direction and allowed ourselves to be assimilated into the very system that had destroyed us in the first place, had tried to destroy us in the first. So from 1965, from 1965 to 2015, we allowed ourselves to have the initiative around justice. Civil rights movement was not about something called diversity or all that kind of stuff. It's about justice. And it's what America owes the descendants of African slaves. That's the major issue right now. And I want to say something about the thing you mentioned earlier, Dr. Belcher. By 1968, we had, at that point, America was reacting in what we call white backlash. There was cities were burning, all of that. And by 68, Martin had designed a campaign called the Poor People's Campaign. This is what you were speaking about, right? Because of my work in the inner city of Boston, I was given Thursday night. Martin brought 1,200 urban pastors to Miami Beach, North Miami Beach, in preparation for the Poor People's Campaign. I had been given Thursday night because I had mixed the work of Martin Luther King and Leon Sullivan. That's a name that Black people better find out about, because Leon Sullivan is a major presence in our struggle. Many people don't know that he is one of the most influential people in getting Mandela out of prison. That's another part of the story. But because of my work with Leon Sullivan, his OIC movement, manpower development, training, community development, all of that stuff, I had brought his work to Boston. And then he had me become his first Southern Regional Director. So I'm working with King and I'm working with Sullivan at the same time. I had been given Thursday night for the keynote address. That was, I think it was the third week in February, like 4 or 5 weeks before King's death. And we were there, 1,200 urban pastors working through strategies. My subject that night, Dr. Belcher, was when Jesus goes back to Wall Street. I took the incident and I called it the homegrown revolution. And I was working out of the post-Pentecost paradigm. The Pentecost community, after the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus, created the paradigm by which society can have economic and social justice. And society allowed that wisdom to be taken over by Karl Marx, called it socialism, communism. The New Testament model is not state-sponsored socialism or communism. King said, and all of that, if I have to die, the guns are following him now. He knows that they're going to take his life. He knows that. There isn't time to tell a whole story about the day he went to get his mother ready for the day when his life would be taken. But he knew that the guns were on him. That night at the old Sheraton Four Ambassadors Hotel, North Miami Beach, where I did Jesus Goes Back to Wall Street. And what I said was, we needed to take a recess from push. And we needed Martin Luther King and an economist whose name was Louis O. Kelso. Kelso had designed the economic system. It's called binary economics, by which you could combine the strengths of capitalism and the strengths of socialism. Both have strengths and both have major weaknesses. But where the strengths come together, you get something that we've now called the beloved economy. You can have a beloved community, but it's not sustained until you have a beloved economy. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness. That's the beloved community. And all other things then will be added unto you. That's economic. When you get those together, you've got a marriage of the best of capitalism and best of socialism. We still haven't gotten there. But it may well be that that's a challenge on the world scene right now. And I predict, Dr. Belcher, that if it happens, it will be the leadership of what I want to call Afro-Christendom. Afro-Christendom. The Jesus movement among Black people in the world is different than the white Jesus movement. The white Jesus movement sponsors slavery. The Afro-Christian Jubilee got us free from slavery and has brought us this far. 400 years, we're still here. We're still praising the Lord. And we're not going to get it done until our children and grandchildren develop understanding, respect, and love for grandma's Jesus.
It seems like, Dr. Wood, that there are so many things that we do not know about Dr. King. So, in your own words, what would you say will be the legacy of Dr. King? What would you say?
I love that question. Number one, reporters would often approach him out on the road and talk about civil rights. He would always correct them and say, my work is of ministry, and what I do out here is a phase of that. I had a conversation with Daddy King and also Coretta after I discovered that what King was doing, we didn't even know the name for it. It was a biblical model. It's called Jubilee. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, bind up the brokenhearted, set the captives free, and proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, which is the year of Jubilee. Society has a Jubilee every 50 years. There is a reckoning around the issues of love, power, and justice. That's where the beloved community idea comes from. When love and power are in balance, justice reigns. And there is no real justice until there is economic justice. We talk about democracy and spreading democracy around the world. There's no such thing as democracy. Demos, without economos is just chaos, right? So what we have now at this stage in the world of sin is a chance to get it right. And I predict that it's going to be America and China who will learn the lesson that King, I'm talking about his legacy now. His legacy is a marriage between beloved community and beloved economy. I asked Coretta about a year after Martin's death if she had ever heard him use the term Jubilee. I understood that the work he was doing was the work of Jubilee, beloved community, beloved economy. It is predicated also on an African concept that I know you're familiar with, my brother, Ubuntu. I am because we are. In other words, who are we? I am. Whose am I? I am because we are. We are comes before I am. And when you work that out in economic terms, you got Ubuntunomics. You got the capacity to make bread and break bread. In the Black church, we sing, let us break bread together on our knees. There's another verse that's got to be added to that now. You're not going to break any bread if you don't make any bread. Guess what? In slavery, we made bread that other folks broke. We never got to break it. The best we got was crumbs. We got to understand now that beloved economy is not about the crumbs of society. It's about the whole loaf. The whole loaf. So the legacy of King, I believe, in my judgment, and I know this would be controversial for a lot of people, but we have not begun to deal with King's legacy yet. We've done stuff in his name that we want to do. But King said, if I have to die, I want to die for poor people. And if I have to die, I want to die among poor people. Now watch this, brother. King's legacy will be based on what we find valuable in what he left behind. But you got to look at King in terms of his legacy as starting not in 1929 when Martin was born, but in 1899 when Daddy King was born. That's important. Here's Daddy King, that's 1899. Daddy King dies in 1984. Watch this. Martin is born in 1920. Oh, your Mama King is born in 1907, right? Martin is born in 1929. Martin was taken from us in 1968. Guess what? 6 years later, his mama is assassinated, sitting at the organ, playing the Lord's Prayer. And then Daddy King lives another 16 years until 1984. Watch this.
Wow.
Watch this. This is a Jesus thing. It's no other way to say it, and I'm not ashamed to say it, and I'm going to say it as long as I got. But this is a Jesus thing. Watch this old man now. His first son has been assassinated. His second son, AD, dies under mysterious circumstances. He dies in the swimming pool. He was a swimmer. Nobody knows what really happened. And then his wife, he called Mama King. He called her Bunch, Daddy King there. She's taken by bullet in 1974. Now here's the old man now later in the 1970s. He goes to Alabama where his son used to pastor, Montgomery, where the capital. He speaks that afternoon to a meeting of the Black Caucus of Alabama. And then he says, I've got a little time before I speak tonight at Dexter Church. I want to stop in to see the governor. He goes in to see George Wallace. Many people don't know this George Wallace story. Most people know the first George Wallace story, a populist. Second George Wallace was a racist. But watch what Daddy King does to George Wallace. Daddy King goes to see him. He walks in the governor's mansion and governor's office there. Mr. Governor, I've come to see you. I've come to tell you that I care about you. And before he left, he prayed for him. And he says, I don't know. He says, I don't know how you feel about me. I may not be your brother, but you are my brother. And I've come to see about you. A little time later, that night, in fact, Daddy King is speaking at Dexter Church, and he says, they tell me there's two people I'm supposed to hate. One of them killed my son. Said it's supposed to be the white one. And the one who killed my wife, the black man, he said, I saw it. He said, they tell me I'm supposed to hate both of them. I don't hate either one of them, he said. He said, hate is too heavy a burden to carry. He said, the issue is not who killed my son, my wife, but what killed them. That is profound biblical wisdom. Not who, but what. Jesus said, pray for your enemies. It might well be, Dr. Belcher, that Afro-Christendom worldwide will come to realize that maybe God sent, maybe somebody brought, but maybe God also sent us to America 400 plus years ago so that Joseph would know whose dream he had. Martin may or may not have understood whose dream when he says, I have a dream. But Joseph found out whose dream he had when his brothers who had sold him into slavery, I might add, Brother Belcher, that right now the motherland has not only Africa, the motherland of humanity, the mama of humanity, not only was stripped of some of her sons and daughters, but the world economy has built a super economy all over the world based on the material wealth of Africa. And it may well be that now is the time that we must rearrange the way we do things so that Africa's richness, the minerals and all of the rest that God put into Africa, that the people of Africa will be able to have their fair share of what God has given them. And so my point is that when Joseph's brothers said, Daddy said when he died, we should come to you, Brother Joseph, and tell you we're sorry that we sold you into slavery. And to tell you that if you will just let us be your slaves so we won't starve. And that's when he realized whose dream it was all the while.
Wow.
That you don't have to be slaves not to starve. You're a family. I'm going to take care of the family. That's the economy
Wow.
that God wants for the whole world.
That's awesome. I want to come back to Africa, but before I do that, I want to ask this question. With the protests for social justice taking place all over the country last year and all over the world last year, as a matter of fact, and the Black Lives Matter, what kind of progress do you think we have made, and what else would you like to see this new generation of leaders do?
First of all, I want to congratulate the young people who have led the Black Lives Matter. And then I want to give a little history lesson. Black lives have always mattered. If your life doesn't matter in your own eyes, then you're making a mistake to ask other people to let your lives matter. That's number one. Number two, in the civil rights movement, for the most part, what I mentioned, for example, about Wall Street, every campaign that we had was preceded by serious planning ahead of time. You had to train your people how to do it. You had to lay down the markers on what you were demanding of the decision makers. If you jump up and out there and marching and there's nothing specific that you have mandated, when you win, you will never know that you won. Because you haven't won, because you weren't asking for anything. You were not specific. I believe that the Black Lives Matter has been useful, but it's time for us now to shut up and go home and work out the next phase of this thing. And I'm just so fearful. I got grandbabies, 2 little grandbabies. And if we don't get this right, their generation is going to catch more hell than any of us have ever caught in America. We got to get smart, go home and figure this thing out, and then come back and relaunch what the movement is. America is in for a reset. The world is in for a reset. I want to suggest that when you talk about Jubilee, that is a possibility of a new start. And when we do, the Black poor, the white poor, the brown poor, the red poor, the yellow poor, whoever they are, they will benefit from the work of Martin Luther King, because it was about good news for the poor. And the only good news that the poor really need to hear right now is that they don't have to stay poor. And there's a way to get beyond that. And it's more than about spirituality and economics. And we got to get it right.
Yes, and I keep hearing that from this interview about spirituality and economics. Now, I was blessed to get a book from you that you autographed for me called In Love We Trust. Just kind of give us the background of why you wrote that book and how does it, in any way, tie into the overall arching dream of Dr. King.
I first wrote that book in 2005, and then I rewrote it in 2006. At first, I had said in love I trust. No, in love we trust. Lessons I learned from Martin Luther King. The great Wyatt Walker, who was Martin Luther King's chief of staff around the Birmingham work and all of that, said, no, you should have said lessons we learned. And then he wrote a new foreword for the book for me. And so when I first came up with lessons I learned from Martin Luther King, it was about what I said about capitalism and socialism being on friendly terms with each other. They got to let the fear and anger go, both systems got fear and anger. When you let those go, you have a compatible, integrated system where the world makes bread together and shares bread together. And the other thing the world's got to face now, an economy, the beloved economy is one where it acknowledges that the one who owns the wealth generating capacity of the earth is the Lord, not any human being. The wealth generating capacity of the earth. We got to figure out, how do you create system so that as wealth is generated, it is distributed across the bottom of the pyramid. You get that right? You're going to have something that's more grand, capitalism, more grand than socialism. Eyes have not seen, ears have not heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man what God got in store for the world. And it's got to start with the motherland, Africa, and her children across the world, bringing verve and vitality to cultures all over the world. But we got to start with America. That's what I say. Once we understand who we are African American, but I call that am African. We are. And we get this right. I am because we are. We go from I am to we are. From we are to we have. In other words, it's me, it's we, it's us, it's ours, it's thine, then it's mine. And it's all that one thing. Jesus said that all may be one, Father, even as we are one. That is Tambo, that all may be one. And that is the driving playbook for the world. And I don't care if you think that these different systems have all the wisdom. They don't. There's one playbook. And it's the wisdom of all of the faith groups coming together where they talk about love. And for the most part, white Christendom has created wars and stuff. Look what Germany is, one of the most enlightened nations on the face of the earth. Look what they did to our Jewish brothers and sisters. We got to get this thing right. Afro-Christendom got to assert itself and wrap its arms around all of the poor folks in the whole wide world. And when that happens, we'll make bread together and we'll break bread together. We'll make it on our feet. We'll break it together on our knees.
Awesome. Well, it's been just so exciting just listening to your experience and your wisdom. And I don't know, our time is just flying by. Well, let me ask you a couple of questions, Dr. Wood, before we conclude today. Not too long ago, you turned 90 years old. And I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you.
6 weeks from now, I'll be 90.
6 weeks from now.
Yeah.
6 weeks from now, you're going to be 90. And it's just in
Wisdom and your experience. How do you feel and what keeps you going?
I learned a long time ago, Dr. Belcher. I've looked at how do you make change in society. I came to the conclusion that something that Golda Meir said, is critics have said that I really love. She said, we will lay aside our violence and all of this foolishness when we learn to love our own children more than we hate our enemies. My wife and I had the privilege for the last 20 years of Mrs. Rosa Parks' life to work closely with her work about children of America and children of the world. And I've come to believe that if we get the world right for the children and the old folks, everybody else will do just fine. And so I kind of styled this saving every child on planet Earth, wherever they are, whatever color they are, whatever their station in life is. Because I found out that the children of the super rich are as lost as the children of the super poor. So we get them around that shepherd's table together, the super rich and the super poor at the same table, and say, what are we going to do to save our children? What is going to take to save our children? Old Zacchaeus will put his super wealth on the table. And the poor folks will bring their wisdom of how poor folks with nothing material to talk about brought about spiritual wealth that blesses all of society. And I call that the shepherd's table. And at the shepherd's table, I want every religion at that table that wants to be there. We're not there to talk theology. It is not about creeds. It's about deeds. At that table, we will ask the question, what is going on in our society that makes you want to holler? What's going on that makes you get up in the morning? And I found out that it's, for me, every time I read about some child who is taking their own lives. And do we know that our society is so sick now that we're driving our babies to commit suicide down to 3 years old? Shame on us. Shame on humanity. We got to fix it. And when the old folks understand, don't let them put you on the shelf, grandma, granddaddy. What you've been through is a university, it's a PhD in itself.
Yeah.
And when our young people want to know, grandma, granddaddy, when you were at the biggest challenge of your life, you knew it was all over. And then you got on the other side of it. What did you feel? What did you say? Mahalia Jackson said it at the March on Washington. The soul looks back and wonders how it got over. How it got over? How it got over. My soul looks back and wonders how it got over. We're going to get over what we're going through now. America, we're going to get over it. All of us, we're going to get over it. We got to get back to the Lord. Let him do what God has always done when people lived with their backs against the wall. To quote the great Howard Thurman, living with your back against the wall. You ain't got no friend but Jesus.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, this new generation, I'm not too sure how many of us in this new generation that are rather familiar with the enormous work that you have done for our community. So, if I were to ask you, what is it that you want to be remembered for? What would you say?
I mentioned the three-time rewrite of my book. Now it's called In Love We Still Trust.
Okay.
Lessons we learned from Martin Luther King. What I would be happy about, Dr. Belcher, if somehow people of the world picked up on this Jubilee thing. I think the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and the Christian community are going to have to get together at that shepherd's table, because they all have something of genius about them that the others don't have. Judaism has something that neither Christendom nor Islam have. Islam has something that neither Judaism nor Christendom has. Their work on usury and the just use of money and stuff is impeccable. And of course, the Christian church has something. It's the genius of Jesus that I call it. The Jubilee is a genius of Jesus. And Joseph is a model of that, the son of Jacob. And I think that Judaism, Christendom, and Islam need to sit down together and look at that Joseph story. Judaism will teach the rest of us how to do Sabbath. Islam will teach us all how to do the sabbatical every 7 years. African can teach us about Jubilee. Jubilee is 7 times 7 sabbaticals, 7 times 7 plus 1. And no historic group has taught that lesson better than the African Christian journey. And we got to get into that and got to understand it, because we got to save this whole world. And the other thing is, what dismays me about my own people sometimes, that we act like Jonah. God wants America to be saved. And so he has sent us to Nineveh We didn't want to go to Nineveh. We want to go to Tarshish. But here it is. We're in Nineveh now. We're in the process of doing what God tells us to do. And I hope to high heaven that Black Jesus people don't act like Jonah in their ingratitude to God for saving all of Nineveh. Everybody in Nineveh is somebody. And if we will be faithful to what God is asking of, God's been too good to Black folk for us to act silly anymore. It's time for Black folks all over the world to stop acting silly. It is Jesus who's brought us through all of these years, right down from Simon of Cyrene carrying the cross of Jesus. And Africa is still carrying the cross of Jesus. But it's a redemptive cross. And it's meant for all of Nineveh, all over the world. Black brothers and sisters, stop worrying about how God is going to work things out who mistreated you or me. Let God have God's way. Nineveh can be saved. America is Nineveh, and we are the Jonah people as well as the Joseph people. God bless us if we keep the faith. God bless all of us.
Dr. Woods, that was tremendous. Thank you so much. We at Grace Temple, our virtual community, we thank you so much for taking time off your busy schedule to just share with us this afternoon. We are just blessed. You've been a great friend of mine. You allowed me to preach when you were pastor in the Pond Street Baptist Church on several occasions, including one of your church's anniversary. And so I want to say thank you so much for what you have done for our community, what you are still doing for our community, and what you have done this afternoon by sharing your experience with our community. May God bless you. Please extend our sincere thanks to Sister Wood and for everything that you both have done. God bless you, and thank you so much, Dr. Wood.
Dr. Belcher, I want to thank you. We are all so proud of your great work. We've seen the unfolding of that, and the kingdom of heaven is so much richer because of the work that you carry on, you and your lovely family and your people there at your church there. God bless.
Thank you so much. God bless you, and give my regards to Sister Wood.
Yes, indeed. I'll be delighted.
Well, this concludes our interview with Dr. Wood on our Black History Spotlight. You have to follow the work of Dr. Wood and what he has done to be a blessing to our community. Thank you.